guys, and welcome to a haunted Christmas movie list. Do you like Christmas but wish it had a little bit more Halloween and was more Creepmas vibes? Are Hallmark movies not really your cup of tea? Well, stick around and check out my movie list so that you can get a little more gore in your Christmas. This list is going to be a mixed bag of some wintry vibe movies along with some of my newer favorites that I've added to my list. I will let you know which one of those is my ultimate favorite at the end of this video. All right, let's get into this list. So one of the first ones I want to mention is Thanksgiving. So Thanksgiving isn't a officially Christmas movie per se. However, because Thanksgiving and Christmas for me always kind of bleed into each other every single year, and because this movie has a lot of Christmas ties to it, including the whole holiday Black Friday rush to buy Christmas gifts, I definitely feel like it is a good addition to this list because it is one of those that I would definitely watch around these holidays to get into the vibe. And to put this movie in a nutshell, if Black Friday shopping turned deadly is what I would say would be a good tagline for it. Next one I want to mention is Violent Night. Violent Night is a relatively new one that I have added to my list, and I definitely see myself watching this one year after year because it is a kind of a dark comedy more than anything, I would say. I don't find it scary, but it's not necessarily a bad thing on this one. It stars one of the major actors from Stranger Things, the guy who plays Hopper, and he does an excellent job in this movie playing Santa, only with a twist. It's kind of like if you combined, I would say, Home Alone and Die Hard is how this movie could be summed up. So if you're not so much into horror, don't mind a little gore, and like action movies around the holidays, then this is definitely one for you. Next on the list is the movie Better Watch Out. So the star, or one of the stars of this movie, actually was in The Visit, which is another horror movie, which technically is also centered around the holidays. And both are equally terrifying and good, but this one is definitely way more hardcore involved with the Christmas holiday. So in a nutshell, this movie is babysitting gone incredibly horribly wrong. It stars several young actors in these movies that aren't actually even American born but do an incredible job at having American accents, and two of them were also in The Visit, which is also horrible but good in the best possible ways. And I would say both of those count as Christmassy movies to me, Christmas horror crossovers. And this one in particular is basically if you took all of your nightmare fuel about any horrible possibilities when you're babysitting someone and brought them to life, then that's this movie. So definitely a must-see if you haven't seen it. These next two that I'm going to mention are really a watch at your own risk, I would say, type movies, because there's a lot of questionable things, which really, honestly, guys, horror in general is a watch at your own risk, I would say. It's important to vet these things, especially if you know you're easily triggered. Just saying. The movie Terrifier 3, I did a full review of what I thought of that movie, which you can find in a link above me here. That movie is a lot, but there are some very genius parts of that movie with Art the Clown in the Santa suit that really make this movie one that I would watch. However, or I would go back and rewatch possibly during the holidays, but it's more of a, again, consume as you can type of deal because it is very intense. There's a lot of gore, and although, it's not exactly the most realistic, it still doesn't make it easier to stomach, at least not for me, but to each their own. And the other one that I want to mention is Black Christmas, and that's because it's an intense ride movie, and that's whether you're seeing the original one or the remakes. There's just some very triggering and awful situations that will haunt your nightmares. So as far as that's concerned, for that reason, I have to just put a little disclaimer in there on these particular movies if you watch them. All right, so not a whole lot of major blockbuster Christmas Halloween crossover movies, I will give you that much. However, these next movies that I'm going to mention are very wintry vibes, and in my opinion, if a movie has a lot of wintry vibes, then for me it definitely falls in the category of horror movies that I would watch around the holidays. So for that reason, the next movies that I'm going to talk about are all movies that don't necessarily have specific Christmas things in them. However, because there's so much snow or winter or whatever, that is why I'm going to include them in this list. Starting with one of my favorites, You're Next. So this movie just kind of is in a league of its own in the sense that the main final girl actually is someone who you feel does everything absolutely right. She doesn't miss a beat in this movie, and because of that, it is such a great watch in my opinion. The whole setup of it involves a family gathering at a cabin. People are wearing sweaters, so for that reason it just feels to me very holiday vibe, and because of that, it is one that I always think of around the holidays. The other great thing about this movie is that if you're someone who easily predicts how movies are going to turn out or what's going to happen, this one's not an easily predictable movie, I would say, for the most part when you watch it the first time. So if that's a concern for you, or if you like movies like that, then this one's a good one to check out. Next one I want to mention is Dracula, and this is the Bram Stoker's Dracula, and I have seen this movie since childhood, and it always gave me Christmassy vibes, and that's because of all the snow and the intense use of the crimson or scarlet red that is utilized in the wardrobe, and not to mention the fact that there's vampires involved, so there's a lot of blood. So that juxtaposition definitely makes me think of Christmas, and because of that, and because it's such a classic and there's so much beautiful cinematography in the movie, I definitely think this is one that falls into my holiday category. Speaking of snow, next is Misery. So I've mentioned this one in a couple of my other movie lists, and that is because there is just something that stays with you about this movie because it is such a horrifying concept. The idea alone of driving around in a blizzard and going off-road and being stuck, upside down in a car alone is terrifying, but then also having a savior quickly turn into your captor is, it's insane. And of course it's from the great Stephen King's mind, so of course it's going to be a crazy wild ride start to finish, and I would say that this award-winning movie is definitely that for a reason. So if you've never seen it and you just didn't think it was your vibe because it's older, whatever, I would say definitely give it a chance. It is a classic for a reason, so definitely check it out if you haven't. And of course, speaking of Stephen King, you cannot mention that movie and not mention The Shining, which is also definitely set in a lot of winter, snowed in vibes. And because of the whole isolation in the middle of the mountainous winter that's going on at the Overlook Hotel, The Shining is an absolute classic for me during this time of year. And now, of course, because of the new movie that came out, Dr. Sleep, both are great movies to marathon back to back. And I always have a hard time figuring out which one I enjoy watching more. I will say that the original is more of a slow build than the newer one, but both are excellent movies, and if you've never seen them, definitely check them out, especially if you're going to be in a wintry environment. It'll be definitely a good layer of creep factor. And speaking of wintry getaways gone wrong, I also want to mention the movie Frozen, which I would say definitely stained my brain for quite a while, if not indefinitely, because it is just horrifying to think of these three people who are friends being at a ski resort and then getting stuck on the ski lift for basically the break that's about to happen for several days. So basically the whole ski lodge is shutting down, and these three people get stuck on this lift and have to figure out what to do. And the whole thing just kind of goes from bad to worse, and you go along this whole mental downward spiral with the main characters, and you just can't help but root for them, of course, throughout the entire thing. And it's kind of also twofold. It's interesting because if you watch it with people that you like to discuss scenarios with, then this is a great one for that, because you could talk about, what would you do in that situation, and see if the characters actually follow in the same route that you might have gone, and just kind of how that could have gone horribly wrong, or what you might have done differently. I just think those types of situations and movies always make it more interesting if you're watching with someone who you like to talk to about those things, either during the movie or after the movie. Another slower, more serious vibe movie that I have seen both the original subtitled version and the newer remade version that was done in English is Let Me In. And that one is technically a vampire movie. However, it is not your typical vampire movie whatsoever. It is definitely way deeper, more interesting a story, and it's all centered around a child vampire who basically is befriending a young child who is the age that physically she still is, but mentally she has been alive for, of course, a lot longer than that. And you just kind of get a completely different view of what that type of lifestyle would be in real life if it was more realistic versus the more glamorized or magical, glittery version that you might get in the usual Hollywood typical style. So because of that, I think this movie's really interesting for that reason, and because it's set pretty much entirely in wintertime, it just very much gives me the holiday vibe. Next, speaking of winter vibes, is 30 Days of Night. So the idea of how people in Alaska handle the longer periods of having like no light at all during the day still kind of perplexes me, and I'm not sure how I would handle that. I know I've read about how daylight savings time tends to affect circadian rhythms and how you sleep, and can cause you all sorts of things, including insomnia. So I can't imagine, how that would affect anything and everything that you do if it went on for that long a period where you had no light whatsoever. So with 30 Days of Night, it being basically about that, but involving scary situations where creatures are involved. In this case, it's also vampires. But again, totally different take on vampires. I would say it's definitely a lot more horrifying and scary than most vampire movies that I've seen. And because of that extra aspect of it being, set at nighttime, it just adds another cool layer to the movie that's different. So if you haven't seen that movie, it is one to see, I would say. Next is Devil's Pass. Devil's Pass is based partially in a true story. And for me, personally, the true story and what happened, or, the mystery of what happened to the people that the story is based on, is exponentially worse than anything that I think could be made up about it, to be honest. And the fact that no one will ever truly know what happened to the people that it's based off of is just so, I don't know, it just really unnerves me to my core. And because of that, that's why this movie to me is intriguing. I will say that the ending is kind of hit or miss. So if you watch the movie, just know that part of the interest for me was the real story. And if you do check this movie out, then make sure that you look into the actual documentaries or biographies of what the actual people went through or what information is known about them, because it is way wilder, in my opinion, than anything that Hollywood could have made up. And the real group that it was based on was called the Dyatlov Pass Incident, and I am probably mispronouncing that because I just looked up how to pronounce it on the computer, and it is a Russian word, and I am by no means someone who can speak or read Russian at all, so forgive me if I mispronounce that, but I will put the word on the screen to make sure that you can try to read it for yourself. Next on my list is The Children. So I would say the tagline for this one would probably be "There's something wrong with the children," because it's a wild concept. I haven't yet watched the newly remade version because the ratings were kind of bad, and honestly, one was great. So, I definitely would say check this one out. Whether you have kids or don't, I'd probably be a little more creeped out if I had kids, probably. But this movie is just basically like there's some sort of illness or infection or something that's only affecting the kids, and they're going like murderous all of a sudden. And I know that sounds silly, but it's nuts, and it kind of, just kind of slowly happens, and it builds really good anxiety because most people, when, it's people that you love or you care about, if they were to start acting weird or, there's a virus going around, you wouldn't want to assume the worst of them. And so I think least of all, your kids, or most parents, try everything they can to play, deaf, dumb, and blind to anything bad their kids do, for the most part. So if that's the case, basically it's saying that if something was going wrong and your children turned, ravenous or murderous, how quickly would you notice? And how quickly would they be able to overtake the adults if that was the case? So if that concept intrigues you at all, then definitely watch this movie. It is nuts, and I thought it was a great thrill ride. Next, on a more serious note and slightly less scary, is the Crimson Peak movie. And this movie, all I could say about it is that it is just beautiful. There is just something so elegant about this movie. It is a time period movie, and it just has such great wardrobes. The scenery, the areas that they, filmed the movie are just really, really nice. But also the acting in this movie is top notch. And there is a whole lot of exactly kind of what it says. It's called Crimson Peak for a reason, because there's a whole lot of that crimson red that is brought into, the overall theming of the movie. And although there is some very off-putting scenarios that happen ultimately in the movie, it is just a very, very well done movie. There's good storyline, great acting. Like I said, the scenery is beautiful. So there's just so many positives to this movie that I really enjoy watching it. Even disregarding the parts that make me a little squeamish, I still really enjoy watching this movie because of all of that. And it kind of is of the same vein, I would say, as the same reason why I really like Sleepy Hollow. And I would also kind of argue that Sleepy Hollow is somewhat of a Christmassy movie too, just because it is set in winter time also, and because there are a lot of ties into that crimson red too. But that's just me. These next ones are not horror at all. However, I did want to mention them anyway because they're just kind of ones that I think are classics. So one of them is Fargo. So this movie is it's an unexpected one that I didn't really watch for a long time. I had seen it referenced in a lot of different ways, especially around the holidays. And I knew it had a following, but I wasn't sure it was my type of movie per se, because I usually gravitated toward either horror or comedy. And when I watched it, to me, it's kind of like almost like a slapstick gore comedy, I would say, because there's a scene where someone goes into a wood chipper, and if that, I feel like that categorizes you as a horror adjacent movie, because that's not really something most people expect to see in a movie of this caliber. So because of that, I definitely think it counts. And again, lots of snow, lots of sweaters, and all of that stuff. And I just really enjoy the vibe of this movie. I think that there's a lot of really great comedy in it, and it has a following for a reason. So if you've never seen it, if you're a fan of like crime thriller type movies, which is what this one technically is categorized as, then this is a must watch, and in my opinion, a must watch around the winter holidays. Next one is technically, again, not a horror movie, but because when I was a kid, the concept of it definitely frightened me, is Gremlins. So Gremlins is a great one. It has all that 80s nostalgia. I enjoy watching it because of all the crazy little creatures, but also, who doesn't love Gizmo? And the fact that there are shirts and other things with Gizmo wearing a Santa hat, it counts. And it's done around Christmas time, and the Gremlins get into a lot of Christmas mayhem, so for that reason, it had to be mentioned, in my opinion. And then another honorable mention I wanted to add to this list, just because I enjoyed it so much and because it has such a heavy winter darkness vibe to it, was the True Detective Season 4 with Jodie Foster. I have to say, guys, and I wasn't really into that show at all. I hadn't really, I saw things about it, and I know that people were watching it actively, and I kept kind of getting things in my feeds about the show. but I wasn't really that interested just because, there are certain things that just aren't your vibe or that you just don't really end up wanting to pick up until, the whole hoopla is over and then you decide to watch it. Well, this one piqued my interest because the concept to me was just so much more intriguing than the other seasons, just for me personally. And the idea of, her being the chief of police, getting a hard time for, being a woman in that role, and then having her deputy who's also a woman, and then there being this crazy inexplicable situation that happens out in the middle of nowhere, basically, in the dead of winter, including like tongues being missing, just to put it lightly. I thought, man, that sounds gnarly. I can't wait to watch that. And of course, I binged every episode as soon as it came out and was so happy that I did, and look forward to owning it, the full complete series, and rewatching it, just because it is such a great show, and the acting in that season was phenomenal. I have heard that the other seasons are also really good, but again, concept-wise, this one was one that piqued my interest, so it's the only one I watched, and I was not sorry that I did. So if you have not seen that and you are a horror fan, I would highly recommend checking it out. And last but not least, the favorite for my family and for my household as far as the Christmas season goes for horror Christmas crossovers is none other than Krampus. So we have seen this movie, I don't know how many times. I definitely got my family on board watching it because it's just kind of one of those movies that, although it does have some scariness to it, it's not so scary that it, is not watchable, in our opinion. And even though we already know what happens, more or less, it's still enjoyable to watch, not to mention the concept of Krampus, what happens when all Christmas hope and everything is lost. The idea of being grateful for what you have and all of those things still kind of tie into it. I love the movie. I think that all the little creatures and goblins and whatever else that are involved in it are really great concepts, but my favorite of all is definitely the gingerbread men that come alive and turn murderous. Those are the funnest part, I would say, just because they make these like really funny little sounds and attack with things like a sharpened candy cane. And I actually was able to go to a horror convention and found a company that actually makes these guys. And they're mountable because they actually have a magnet built into them. And I was so happy to have that. So I will definitely make sure to show you guys exactly what that looks like, because it's just fun and I enjoyed having that in my collection. It actually sits on my front door on the inside, so I get to see it anytime I want to. So shout out to the creators of these items, because this is what makes going to Halloween or horror conventions so unique, is because you can find people who are creating things that aren't out there on the free market, that are just so great to have as memorabilia in your house, to add to your collection if you are someone who just has Halloween alive all year long like I do. So without further ado, my little magnetic gingerbread guy, and this is what he looks like. So this is a butcher knife that's going straight into his little belly, and you can see the great little details on his dead face, and he is pretty weighted, and he's got two magnets on the back of him, so he grips on really well. We open and close our door with zero issues of it sliding down or anything like that, of our front door, because our front door is metal. But I just love this. When I got it and I did the review of all the items that I picked up at that particular convention, I made sure to highlight this guy in particular, because it's just probably one of the best things I think that I've ever bought that was handmade, from a convention or from anywhere really, that is from a movie that I really enjoy watching over and over again. So definitely one that I don't regret spending the money on, and yeah, so check that out. And if I can locate their information, I will definitely link them in the description below if you want to try to see if you can snag one of these guys yourself. Hope you guys enjoyed this Christmas sweater that I got. I really enjoy the fact that they are making more and more Halloween themed Christmas stuff because it is definitely something that I enjoy picking up. And so this is one of my latest additions. So I will let you guys hear the little audio that comes with it. Well, there you have it. So if you're like me and you love Halloween and you want to see more of the items that I've picked up, definitely check out some of the links above here. So that way you can check out other videos that I have of Halloween hauls. And if you aren't subscribed, definitely hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so that you can see the next video that I come out with. And thanks a million for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye, guys.